headlines of all sports. Welcome back to Max on Boxing. I'm Max Kellerman. It has indeed been a couple of weeks since I've been on, at least on this show. Let's catch up on all the big headlines, shall we? We begin with this. Vasily Lomachenko dominates Masayoshi Nakatani in his return. This is the first fight since Lomachenko was upset by Teofimo Lopez for the lightweight championship of the world. He won this fight against Nakatani by a 9th round stoppage. And he looked like Lomachenko. He surrounded Nakatani. He was defensively very good. He picked his angles and beat him down and broke him down and eventually stopped him. If I'm going to be nitpicky, maybe I would say that Lomachenko's distance with his footwork is not quite maybe as precise as it once was. Maybe. I'll say this. Lomachenko wants Teofimo in a rematch. That would be an excellent rematch. It's not like Teofimo blew him out. He won decisively, but it was a good fight, and I think the rematch would be even better. Next headline. Gervonta Tank Davis stops Mario Barrios in the 11th round. Tank moved up to junior welterweight for this fight. Barrios was undefeated. There's some bogus, quote-unquote, regular belt involved. But the real point of this is that Tank Davis shows he can be a money fighter at 130, 135, or 140. And by the way, this is not the first time we've seen Tank in a fight where you go at different points. Wait a minute, is he going to win this fight? Where the other guy's tagging him and the outcome is in doubt. That's a fight fan's favorite kind of fighter. He delivers drama, and so far throughout his career, always the win, having stopped all but one of his opponents by knockout, dropped Barrios 3 times, and stopped him too. Who wants it at 130, 135, 140? Do Tank and Floyd, do they want it for Tank, or are they going to pick and choose opponents as carefully as Floyd did? Because Tank would be a hell of a fight with anyone in 3 weight classes. I'm hoping he fights the very best and not 1 or 2 notches below that, which is what he's done so far. Next headline. Tyson Fury tests positive for COVID. His 3rd fight with Deontay Wilder postponed. Of course, that fight was scheduled for July 24th in Las Vegas. The new date is now October 9th. I'm going to ask Mike Coppinger about this, the latest about this, in the next segment here on Max on Boxing. And I'll just say this. Look, the real problem here is not that this fight was postponed, is that this pushes back Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Tyson Fury is the lineal heavyweight champion. I think he's the best heavyweight in the world, and I think he's the legit heavyweight champ. But you can argue he's not undisputed. He'd have to beat Anthony Joshua to do that. Deontay Wilder is an underrated fighter. You know how good Deontay Wilder is? The fact that he can even compete with guys who outweigh him by 50 pounds? Let's not sleep on Deontay, but it looks like Tyson had his number in the last fight. Tyson was vaccinated once, never got around getting that 2nd vaccination. I'm not saying it necessarily would have saved this fight, but maybe, who knows? Get that 2nd vaccination if you haven't yet. Next headline. Speaking of fights that COVID has had an impact on, Teofimo Lopez, George Kambosos, they disagree on location and date of their rescheduled fight. This fight was scheduled for June 19th, but was postponed when Teofimo came down with COVID. The fight was rescheduled for August 14th. Now, Mike Coppinger reports that Triller wants to move the fight to October 17th in Australia, but Teofimo's camp says they don't want to fight in Australia and might be willing to vacate the belt and not fight at all. Let me tell you something about belts. Teofimo Lopez does not need any of these absurd sanctioning body belts. He is the lightweight champion of the world. He's the undisputed lightweight champion of the world. If anyone has a dispute, it's Devin Haney. That's the only guy, and I don't think his dispute is strong, but he does have a legitimate point of view. Otherwise, belt or no belt, garbage. He's the lightweight champion of the world. Teofimo, you should act that way. They don't want the Kambosos fight. How about a rematch with Lomachenko for the lightweight title? Next headline. Joseph Jojo Diaz Jr. beats Javier Fortuna by unanimous decision. It was Diaz's first fight at lightweight. Look, Diaz is a real good featherweight, real good junior lightweight. He was in a good fight here against a real guy. He's a good lightweight. After the fight, he says he wants to take on Ryan Garcia or Devin Haney next. Jojo Diaz is a real throwback fighter. A southpaw with real skill and grit. Not a huge puncher, but can stay in the pocket, fight responsibly, defensively. while providing real action. Diaz is the kind of guy who'd be a contender in any era. But there's a difference between that and being able to beat that next level of talented fighter. Gary Russell Jr. was a little too much. I suspect the same will be true of Devin Haney, but I'd love to see the fight. Next headline, Jermell Charlo, Brian Castano meet tomorrow night for the undisputed title at junior middleweight. A lot of these divisions are being unified, 140 pounds, 4 pounds. This fight, obviously, for all the belts at 154, and there will be no one else who can stake a claim to being champion other than the winner of this fight, who should be Charlo. Castano's a good fighter. He beat Patrick Teixeira, who's, a real guy for the belt, but he is the underdog here and for good reason. Whether or not Jermell Charlo has that kind of pound-for-pound level talent, he's not just a typical belt holder. He's something more than that. And if he beats Castano as he's favored to do, he's a lot more than that. He's the undisputed junior middleweight champ. There haven't been that many guys in the era of, never mind, ESPN's very own Mike Coppinger. Mike, I see you're with the network now. You can afford a jacket. That's very good. You got a coat on. Nice, a collared shirt. Good, that network money. Mike, we were supposed to be in Vegas next week, both of us, for Fury Wilder 3. Now that has been postponed because of COVID, issues with Fury. Fury got COVID. A story that you first reported. What's the latest with this fight?
Yeah, Max, the fight is now October 9th, still going to be ESPN Plus pay-per-view, and it really gives the guys more time to train. I don't know if it really helps one guy more than the other, but Fury did test positive for COVID. It was a big outbreak in his training camp, and the first positive test came back last Tuesday, and the fight obviously couldn't go on. You can't deal with these kind of risks. You're going to have to be able to test it. I have people asking me now, well, Fury's already negative. Why couldn't they just go through with the fight? It's just too big of a risk, obviously. Teofimo Lopez, George Kambosos, they lost about $5 million going through with that fight, the week of the fight. So,
yeah, get vaccinated, everyone. And matter of fact, get them both. Don't just get one. By the way, Wilder I don't like against Tyson Fury because Tyson Fury is the best boxer in the division, beat him up pretty good in the rematch, and also has 50, 60 pounds on the guy. But, Mike, it seems to me like Deontay has become underrated. He's an amazing fighter to be able to get in there and compete evenly, for at least in the first fight, considering the knockdowns, with a guy who's the best boxer in the division and 50 pounds bigger than him. The Teofimo Lopez Kambosos fight, Mike, you alluded to it, was originally scheduled for June 19th. Teofimo got COVID. Then it was moved to August 14th. And now you have reported Triller wants to move the fight to October in Australia, but the Teofimo camp does not want the fight there or push to October, to the point they might be willing to vacate a belt. How do you see this playing out?
Max, these are the stories that make us love boxing, right? Managers yelling at promoters and so forth. I don't think the fight's going to happen. David McWater, Teofimo Lopez's manager, is saying they would rather give up the title than go to Australia and have to deal with that 14-day quarantine. Obviously, Lopez is the champion. They believe they should have the advantage. Triller's position is, hey, look, we lost $5 million. We were going through with the fight. Now we want to make that money back. Boxing is getting pretty big in Australia. Kambosos is a good attraction over there. He's from Sydney. And now there's a battle with the IBF. We're going to see what the IBF rules on. But I, at this moment, would say the fight's not going to happen.
What does Teofimo Lopez need with a belt? He is the lightweight champion of the world. Whether or not he brings one of those absurd belts in the ring with him, he won the championship of the world from Vasily Lomachenko. Does he really care about the IBF belt, do you think, Mike?
I do think these fighters care about the belts, especially when they're undisputed champion. Me and you, I'm with you. I don't care about the belts. We know who the champion is. But let's not forget, Triller was going to pay him a career-high, nearly $4 million payday. That's gone if he doesn't do this fight. But I'm being told, silver lining, that if the fight doesn't happen, as I predict, Top Rank is now discussing Lomachenko versus Lopez 2, possibly before the end of the year, and I love that rematch.
I love that rematch too, Mike. That's a much more dangerous. I mean, Kambosos is a good fighter, but Lomachenko is a great fighter, and it appears so is Teofimo Lopez. Lomachenko gave him a good fight the first time. He lost, but it was a good fight. And these are two of the best fighters in the division. The rematch should be even better. I love the idea of a Lopez-Lomachenko rematch, hopefully right here on ESPN, right? There's still a chance that could be on the network, correct, Mike? Because if the Kambosos fight falls through, that could be on ESPN. We could be working that fight.
That would definitely be an ESPN fight, Max. And like you, I scored that fight pretty closely. I thought Lomachenko was excellent down the stretch once he realized that he was running out of time. I think the rematch will be an even better fight.
I agree. You are currently in Texas and will be there tomorrow night for the Jermell Charlo-Brian Castaño undisputed junior middleweight fight. Castaño beat Teixeira fair and square, has a belt for what it's worth. He is not perceived, at least not by me, if not the boxing community, as special a fighter as Jermell Charlo. Not that Charlo is considered, oh my God, he's the next pound-for-pound champ. But Jermell Charlo's a little bit more than just a belt holder, than just a kind of current day, hey, he has a belt or two. He looks like a guy who's a cut above. Do you also like Charlo in that fight? If so, what would you want to see him do next?
I would love to see Jermell Charlo against Terence Crawford at 154. Crawford needs a fight badly. It's an excellent matchup, and these guys have been talking trash on social media for months and months. I did a story I actually ran on ESPN.com today about the undisputed title fight, and I asked Jermell Charlo how hard he had to push, and he actually mentioned Crawford and says, you know what, Terence Crawford, I don't think this guy pushes hard for the fights he needs. So there's some fighting words there. That's the natural fight for me because no one else at 154 is going to challenge Charlo.
You know, it's interesting. Terence Crawford criticized for his level of opposition. Max, how could you have number one pound for pound considering how active Canelo's been against better fighters? If Terence Crawford jumps up to 54 and wins the undisputed title from Charlo, especially if Charlo impresses against Castaño, I'll bet you guys like you will be singing a different tune about Terence Crawford's pound-for-pound status, won't you, Mike?
I would, but let's see it happen first, Max. I think Crawford has all the talent in the world. I want to see the opponents. I don't want to go off the eye test. And one thing I want to point out real quick, I know Castaño is a title holder, and a lot of times in these fights we overlook him. I think he's a damn good fighter. He had a draw with Arizona de Lara. He went to France and beat Michel Soro, who I think is a pretty solid fighter. I think Castaño is going to give Charlo all he can handle.
I agree. It's the kind of fight where if Charlo thinks he's just going to show up and beat Castaño because of his name, that ain't going to happen. But I do think it would take something like that, like Charlo overlooking him, in order for Castaño to win. Should be an excellent fight as long as it lasts. We'll see tomorrow night. What is the latest with Canelo, and who might he fight next, Mike?
Max, it's crazy, right? Anytime Canelo wants to fight, there's a saga. And we know why. It's because the guy he's going to fight is really hitting the lottery. It's a sweepstakes. But each time he wants to fight, these things drag out until the last possible second. And here we are again. We're about 8 weeks out from Mexican Independence Day weekend, September 18th. Canelo is steadfast. He wants Caleb Plant. And that fight is still being negotiated, but they've hit a bit of a snag. And I'm told that the plan B that's emerged is Dimitri Bivol, a title holder at 175. Canelo has no problem going back to 175, where he beat Kovalev, but plan A remains Caleb Plant. And I think right now we're going to need an answer, if not by Monday, probably mid next week.
Bivol is really interesting. I think the better Biev Canelo fight is, other than Crawford and Spence, the best fight you can make in boxing. Not the biggest, that'd be Fury and Joshua, but the best. I mean, that is hard to say who would win. It would be bombs away the entire way. The styles matchup is perfect. The counterpuncher in Canelo who wants you to come to him versus the guy who wants you to stay there so he can fight you. But Bivol, in a way, may be a more dangerous fight in terms of winning and losing for Canelo, because you look at Caleb Plant, Bivol is kind of like that, only more refined. My hat would be off to Canelo if he actually chooses Bivol if a Plant fight falls through. Isn't that a kind of dangerous in-between type fight for Canelo to take?
I think it is. You're right, because Bivol isn't recognized by anybody in America, really. He's only known to us hardcore fans. He's very tricky. He has a great jab, and he's bigger than Canelo. So I would take my hat off to him as well. But Canelo has shown, I think he takes it very seriously, his status as the biggest star in boxing, and he wants to take on the biggest challenges. I think that's what we're going to see once again.
You got to love that about Canelo. No, that's why we thought, hey, Triple G, because when Triple G couldn't get a fight with another middleweight star, we all thought in boxing, hey, Canelo will fight him, and sure enough, he did, and they made two great fights, and Canelo beat him. Real quick, back to the heavyweights, Mike. How confident are you that we will get Fury and Joshua after all this? I know people are hung up on 2021, whenever that is. Do we get Fury and Joshua sometime in the not-too-distant future?
I can't see why we wouldn't. They already agreed to terms. That part's out of the way. I guess we could see some wacky scenario because this is boxing where maybe Fury looks better against Wilder than Joshua does against Usyk. I know a lot of people think Usyk might beat Joshua. I'm not one of them. I don't think Usyk is really a heavyweight. I think Joshua knocks him out. And I do think we're going to get Fury-Joshua for all 4 belts. And more importantly, the biggest fight in boxing in a long time early next year.
Yeah, the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. And pitting the 2 best heavyweights on the planet. Certainly, if Fury beats Wilder again and Joshua beats Usyk, who's a very talented Olympic gold medalist, undefeated cruiserweight, and not a small guy. He's a tall guy, but not by today's super-duper heavyweight standards. There could be no argument. Those would be the 2 best heavyweights, the only 2 guys with a claim to the throne. It would be the biggest heavyweight fight in years. We see that the same way, Mike. Hopefully it happens. My spirits are buoyed by the fact that you do think it happens in 2022. Thank you, Mike Coppinger, and thank you for finally wearing a collared shirt and a jacket on this show and a coat on the show. I appreciate it.
The lighting right, too. Get the whole trifecta.
Yes, a tie would be good next time. Mike Coppinger of ESPN. Ladies.